You gotta do that every time. You gotta do that every freaking time. I don't even understand why. Your setup is looking super pro.
Is it?
I love it. Yeah, it looks like you
Oh,
have. It looks like you have like an actual profession going on.
it's all. That's why they call it a stage, Eric.
I see. I think that's just a photo back there. That's like taking one of those library pictures with
It's
your
not even
family.
books. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a screen I roll
Yeah,
down.
exactly. It's like a soft focus photograph that's happening on the background. How are you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's daytime.
Right,
Can't
but
wish.
usually when we record with you, it's about 5 o'clock your time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it
Sun's
dark?
come down a little bit.
But it's dramatically darker than it is right now.
Well, yeah, it's like
Do you have like
first of all, it's
blackout
summer.
shades?
No, no, no. This summertime. We are. I'm in an area of the world that is Oregon that is like significantly more sun this time of year. It doesn't get dark until about 8:30 my time.
Okay,
There's a lot of sun happening up out here in the Pacific Northwest, man.
that's good. I can't wait
Well,
to
I think
see
so.
it.
Well, you're coming out here soon, right? You, me, and
Mhm.
Maddie. You're going to be out. Where are we going?
Emerald City Comic Con.
Emerald City Comic Con. Now, you guys are tabling. I'm just there as a spectator
Yes.
because I can't be bothered. This composition like really pisses me off. Like you wouldn't believe. See how it's like,
Off center?
yeah,
You don't
I
like
know.
that?
I don't
What
like it.
changed?
Probably
Did,
because I lowered my camera. Funny. Stand by. I'm going to fix it. Right in the middle of an
okay.
episode, I'm going to fix it. Stand by.
Okay. Well, everyone, it's been nice having you. I know at this point you are sick of
No,
our
it's not working.
unprofessional asses. We just lost every view. Oh, and we're yeah, here we go again. I don't blame you for wanting to leave the podcast. I
All
blame
right, there it
Eric.
is.
Okay, here
That's
we go.
much better.
Okay.
That's professional. There you
Now
go.
it's
That's
better.
intentional.
Right.
It's weird how it's just like cutting off the top of my head, but that's all right. I'm over it.
Yeah, you made
I'm
fun of
more of
me
the
for that the other week, worrying about
no,
that
no.
cutting off the.
I'm more of the left and right. I'm more of the horizontal, not the vertical. So anyway,
Okay.
in your look, listen. The reason why I care about cutting off my head is look at the natural, just my amazing proportion to my head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like
I
perfect
I am
proportions.
I'm pulled from a like a medical journal of like perfect head proportion.
Is that so?
I mean, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but
Toot toot.
all right. Where were we before I had to freak
Emerald
out
City
over
Comic Con.
Emerald City Comic Con? We're going together, where you guys are going as a table with Essential Sequential. Small plug for our art dealer, Jason Schachter, and the multiple clients that he has under his Essential Sequential banner. If you are interested in buying some of our artwork, mine, Shawn, and Mateo's, please go there. And if you accidentally happen to see other people's, look past Dan Panosian's page. But if you happen to land on other people's original art and you are so compelled to support us as artists, that would be great. EssentialSequential.com. So yeah, so Essential Sequential is going to be at Emerald City. You guys are setting up. That's a good
Yes.
show for you, right? Or has it been long enough that you don't have a point of reference anymore?
I've always enjoyed the show. I think. I mean, I've had some not great ones, just in terms of like making money at the show, but I've also had some of my best ones there.
Sure.
But whatever it is.
It's a weird show, isn't it? Because there's shows that we know for sure going to be consistent no matter what. Not necessarily like money hand over fist, but definitely I'm going to make X amount, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Emerald City is sort of hit and miss for me. I don't know if it's the
yeah.
same
I
for you.
I find for the Read Expo shows and the Fan Expo shows, that's the case
Mm,
for me.
you're right. Right, it's a hit or miss.
Yeah, yeah. You just don't know what you're gonna get.
I forget sometimes that is a Reed show, isn't it?
Right, because it didn't used to be, and I think it was more consistent before it was.
Yeah,
Read,
shout out to Jim DeMonaco's
yes.
who used to run Emerald City before he handed over the reins to Reed. I think he was actually under their employ for a little bit there, and then he, after his contract ran out, he said thank you very much and went the other way. But I think
Yes.
the polish that that show had exhibited has a lot to do with the fact that Jim is on his game almost at 110% always.
Absolutely, and he was real good to the talent too.
He really
Like,
was.
yeah, for
Super
sure.
accommodating, super approachable. He's one of the guys that, when you're a guy who's running a show, especially after it crossed that ridiculous successful threshold that Emerald City has, right? Very few shows are like that anymore. But Jim was always one of the guys that was on the floor, right? I don't know how he stayed upright the entire time,
Yeah,
but he was always, I don't know how many miles that guy puts in just walking up and down the aisles, making sure that everybody's okay.
yeah,
But he took particular time to make sure that we were taken care of and that everybody was comfortable and happy, and any of our concerns were addressed considering the limitations of any given show. But again, shout out to Jim. He's actually helping Bobby Chu organize Lightbox year in and year out.
yeah. That's one I
So
want to do. We
yeah, if
talked
you
about that
see
last
a
time.
similar professional polish to that show, which by the way you need to find a way to make out to, if you
Yes,
see a polish to that show, it's because Jim is at the front end of helping to organize. So
yes, yes,
anyway,
yes.
respect to Jim. Okay, so we don't make consistent money ever since the this switch happened. That's not necessarily due to the personnel. It's just due to the. What do you think? It's just like the.
I think the con became something different just because
Mm,
of the brand of that's a Reed show, Emerald City.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more of a pop culture Comic Con
Right.
than a traditional Comic Con. I think Emerald
Right.
City used to be more like a Heroes where people came for the art of comic books, and
Right.
now, I mean, it's a lot more people coming, but a lot of them are coming to get their favorite actor's autograph and stuff like that, I think.
Yeah. Right. I think that. And by the way, I want your perspective on this. Yeah, I don't know how many San Diego Comic Cons that you've been to, but I'd been going there since early '90s, so I'd seen the
Yeah, I started going
different.
there mid-90s. I
Yeah,
haven't been
yeah.
back there in a while, but I went every year up until about 10 years ago. Well,
There it is.
7 years ago.
I think mine is similar, right? Number one, it was like the I felt very lucky that I was regionally pretty close to where it was. I was living in Los Angeles at the
Yeah.
time. This thing was in San Diego. So it was easy enough for me and my friends to sort of pack up two cars filled with a total of maybe 10, 12 people, right?
I
And we
remember
would go down there and shack up at the local Howard Johnson's that was 12 to
those
13 blocks
days.
away.
Right.
And we would all be in one room together. And I was recollecting this story with Cassandra because we were talking about conventions just recently. That my friends would check in, and whoever it was that set up the hotel name, and then we would sort of sneak the rest of our crew into that one hotel room.
I did the same exact
It
thing.
was so, at least for us, early college kids. I never went to college, but my friends did. And early college sort of budgets. Oh man, affording an entire weekend hotel plus whatever you want to buy at the show plus food. It was pretty. It was pretty substantial for us. It was like you got a plan for that entire area, but it was super worth it because sometimes we wouldn't even have the presence of mind to sort of order the tickets in advance. As a matter of fact, advance tickets for San Diego Comic Con wasn't even a priority back in the
Yeah,
day, not for the
yeah,
organization, right? They would just say, hey, we're going to have it this month. And it was so open, it was so available that you could show up day of,
yep.
Wednesday night, Thursday morning, and be like, I
Which
want a
is what
ticket for
I
all
always
shows.
did. Yeah, that's what I always
Yeah,
did.
it was so easy. And I was watching. I can't remember who was talking about it, but I was really trying hard to recollect when the tide turned to turn it into what
Hmm.
it's sort of become now and built on, right? So it's like, oh, you can't get, you know, tickets day of anymore. You have to pre-order them, and
Yeah.
they're no longer holding them at the show where they're printing them. At they
Mhm.
actually have to send it to you with like
Right.
all of these security features built into it, and they've long since outgrown the show or outgrown the venue, but San Diego had actively found a way to keep them there because that influx of people and business is really sort of some businesses in that area, quite frankly, hinge on that show
I think
because.
much of that
Okay.
city hinges on the show. I
Okay.
mean, look at the growth of the city itself from
That
this
area.
show. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that because I remember again sleeping 12 blocks away. I don't even know if that Howard Johnson's is there anymore, but
I don't think so.
walking, yeah, walking from that hotel to the actual convention floor or to the convention center, it was one straight street. I can't remember what that main street is that leads you right through downtown San Diego.
Mhm,
Now they have
mhm.
a marquee that says "Welcome to downtown San Diego," but that didn't exist back then, and it was
Right.
harrowing because there was just nothing but like transients and
Mhm.
drug users and drug
Yeah,
dealers from our hotel to downtown.
yeah.
And to your point, if you take a look at that now, it's unrecognizable to where it was in the early to mid '90s. It
Yeah,
really is
I mean, I
transformed.
can't even imagine now because I haven't been there in, like, 7 years how much different it probably looks.
I the last time that I went was, oh gosh, it had to have been 2008, a little while, you know, and they had since outgrown the space. So there was a lot of venues that were being held off-site, not
Yes,
necessarily
yes.
officially,
Yeah.
but and they've since spread onto whatever available space in front of the convention center. So a lot of
Yeah.
things are popping up there.
Mhm.
And like, the point is like as a community and as a bit and as a organization, it behooves the city to keep that place, to keep that show on San Diego because it keeps some businesses afloat.
Hell yeah. For
Now
sure.
I don't know. Let me take a step back. Other shows, pop included, now take a look at San Diego and see the kind of business that it does, and it's pretty. I think it's pretty profitable. I don't know for sure.
I
I'm not.
I'd
I'm not.
imagine, yeah, I'd
Yeah,
imagine
I'd
so.
bet good money that it is. But they're using San Diego as a point of reference, sort of like a framework in how they build the ideal show. And I think that's the reason why you and I have seen a shift from where Emerald City was back when Jim was helping to run it to what it turned into after Reed took over, right? It's very sort of like, oh, I can see the direct connections to where you're pulling from as far as San Diego Comic Con is concerned.
Right, right.
But I don't know if that's really ultimately helping, at least in that impactful, profound way that San Diego is helping their extended community, their surrounding businesses, to where like Emerald City is. You know what I mean? Because the Emerald
Yeah,
City is at the Washington Convention Center. Those places are pretty. I think year in year out, those places that's a tourist area anyway.
right, right, and the same thing Javits in New York, like, if
Mm-hmm.
Comic-Con wasn't there, there'd be something else there making the money it needs to make. I don't think
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you on that. I don't know that in other cities, because San Diego, like, downtown San Diego was not a destination for anything.
No, no. I mean,
The
I think
beaches
they
were.
built it up to turn into into something, but
Right.
that place was pretty much uninhabitable
Yeah.
after the show shut down. It's like
Mhm.
waiting outside of the San Diego Convention Center for Hall H didn't turn into a thing until much later because
Right,
you wouldn't want to be outside the convention center once the
right.
place went dark. I think the reason why it's hard for me to track when that switch happened
Well,
from
did
a
you and I
color.
have this conversation recently? I
I
was
don't think
talking
so.
to someone, and someone had the theory, they attributed it to a movie, and
Yeah,
I think it was Twilight.
sure,
I was talking
sure.
to someone about this, and their theory was Twilight changed everything for Comic-Con.
As in, they brought Twilight out and they had to get the panels in Hall H and the stars in Hall
And
H. Yeah,
that's when all the people started flocking there.
That may be the case. And there's a lot of pieces that are moving in the background in order to help facilitate that, not the least of which, like the studios that help to fund Twilight, right? The studios that put on Twilight. Twilight is put on by Warner Brothers. Is that a Warner Brothers?
I
Anyway,
don't know.
whoever it is had deep enough pockets to say, hey, how would it be cool if we brought out our stars to your show? Which is a weird, like if you think about the people that were going to San Diego Comic-Con, there may be a Venn diagram to the people who would go and watch Twilight as a movie, and that's the reason why I'm unsure whether or not it was Twilight. But
Hmm.
like I'm trying to think of like the people who go to San Diego Comic-Con, the people who go and watch Twilight, and I don't know how much the crossover there was there. But maybe that's not really the point. Maybe at some point the studios that put on Twilight was just like, hey, we're gonna bring the stars out to this show in San Diego, and from there it started to sort of like build, like, oh,
Right.
this is really um, helpful to get our word out for whatever movie that we may have out,
Right.
because that's when I started. I don't know if I don't know if the Twilight was the sort of the thing that kind of pushed everything over, but I started seeing buildings be just like dressed
Yeah.
in like they turned themselves into giant billboards for whatever the
Yeah.
new thing was coming out,
And in
right?
front of each, all around the convention, the like every open area of space was filled with some sort of ad. Almost a lot of them are interactive.
Sure,
Walk
sure,
through this, and the
yeah,
Walking Dead experience and stuff like that.
sure, sure, yeah. I mean, it there was a lot of things there, whether it be like these pop-ups or however you refer to them, that were very comic book centric. You just brought up The Walking Dead. That's a huge one. But when it comes to there was other things that I don't think fit that show until San Diego adopted the. I'm trying to remember when San Diego officially turned into Comic Con International. Do you remember
Yeah,
that switch when it was before it was called San
it,
Diego Comic
it
Con?
used to be San Diego Comic Con. Yes,
Hmm. And
I
then it
don't
became like Comic
remember.
Con International or whatever it
Right.
was. And I think it was around that time something happened at that event where I go like, I wonder why they're calling themselves this, because that's when the maybe not exactly at that particular show, but slowly they started moving away from more comic book centric things. I mean, we're talking dead centric, right?
Right.
Into like pop culture,
Right.
because they started experiencing like the business boom of like, oh, we can bring out these stars
Right.
that are now, in the movies, and they started favoring that more. They started favoring the Hollywood stuff more, and I don't begrudge them for it. Whatever, you got to make your money. That thing costs
Right.
an arm and a leg to put on, I
Right.
suspect. I heard a dollar figure that was being bounced around by Warner Brothers, what it meant for DC/Warner Brothers to be at the show, and I'm like, that's the budget of some animation productions that you just said right now,
Right. Right.
in the
Well,
tens of millions,
yeah, and I remember it got to the point where getting exhibitor space was so outrageous
Sure.
that publishers were like, it's not worth it for us. I remember
Mm-hmm.
going a year, there was no representation from Marvel or DC. Of course, this
Mm-hmm.
is before the movies were coming out and making that kind of money, because after
Yeah.
that, Marvel's booth became movie ads.
Yeah. Exactly.
But it used to be, small little comic book publisher booths, and
Exactly.
I remember that went away.
Yeah, and let me tie that back to the current way that, and I'm not going to dunk on the industry, but I think it really did have a profound way of how the comic book industry started conducting themselves, right? Um, so anyway, yeah. So going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, as we start seeing these shows sort of like become less and less mom and pop, and more like what would you call it? Like
Corporate,
not, yeah, like franchise, and not necessarily even franchises, but like they fall under one banner. I guess corporate is the best way to
yeah,
explain it.
that's what I always call it.
Yeah, it starts to become. I mean, again, the model is there, right? They follow San Diego Comic Con. So it becomes less and less of a comic book show because
Right.
that's not as successful, that's not as financially viable. and it starts to become more and more about a pop culture show, which is even more viable. I'm not insulted by it. Run your business the way you want to run your business.
Right.
But the more I think about it, the less and less I want to be involved in something like that. Right?
I agree with you. I mean, I was thinking about next year, and we had talked about being how selective we're going to be about what shows we attend, and I'm taking all the shows I'm doing this year to give me feedback. But I mean, it's as far as Read and Fan Expo, those are shows I'll be doing a lot less of, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that for what I'm looking to get from a con, those are the ideal spots to hit.
I agree. I agree. Both you and I are running businesses right now. You are doing INKPULP instructions. By the way, we talked about how you made the switch onto having a more sort of closed off ecosystem when it comes to people finding you. Where can they find you now, Shawn?
INKPulpinstruction.com.
Right on. Right on. And I'm working on my business called Arc Athena. It's a 6-issue miniseries that I'm slowly but consistently crowdfunding. Slower than I'd like, faster than most of that's out there. Book
Yeah,
two is
yeah.
out. Yeah, book two is out, and you can buy the second book in at iconiccomics.com. And I'll be able to. I'm working on book three now. There's a couple of things happening behind the scenes that's kind of slowing me down from the other hats that I have to wear when it comes to publishing. Like it's not just drawing it and then sending it to the publisher and the editor and going like, "Good luck." I'm actually the publisher and I'm not the editor, but certainly everything falls to me to either sign off on, or to say, "Hey, that needs amendment," and that's a lot of time spent. Surprisingly, more time than I'd grown accustomed to.
That's funny. I was going to ask you today. I find it. I find it difficult to understand how to schedule because every day there seems to be so much that pops up in regards to your business and
Yeah,
my business that
yeah,
requires attention that it just
yeah,
eats away time.
yeah,
And it's just it's great because it's teaching me how to run a business and it's teaching me
yeah,
what everyone who has a business is doing.
yeah.
um, but it's also something I was completely ignorant about. And uh,
Well, let's get back to that real quick. Let's get
okay,
back to that in a minute.
okay, go ahead.
What were we talking about? Oh yeah, being more selective about our shows. And as I look towards that sort of horizon, right? So as I look towards that trajectory, I'm looking at the sobering concept that there's a hand like Jason, and I'll end up talking to Jason Schachter about this later on. That I'm looking at the sobering reality that we might be holding on to a business model that's not as viable anymore.
You're talking about the cons.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
going there and doing commissions and blah
I
blah
I
blah. It
was
might
thinking the same thing
that
yesterday.
might be phasing itself out already. I'd like to I'd like to tap all the essential sequential artists and say like, how are you doing at these shows? Are you doing it because it's what you come to know, or is it because it's as good business for you as it was previously? Now, there may be exceptions to that. Like Maddie has always been, ever
Yeah,
since he
yeah.
turned a corner, he's always been busy. He can't turn those things out around fast enough. But I
No,
always ask, like,
but he's also, I mean, he gets to a show and he doesn't lift his head from his desk for
exactly,
4 days. I mean,
exactly,
he's
yeah,
on like I think he's working harder at cons than he does at home. In fact, I
I
know he
agree,
is because I know his
I
schedule at
agree.
home.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm like, is that worth it for you? Like at the end of the day, the time and energy and finances that it took you to travel to this side of the world, living from Italy, is it all a wash? Or does it make more
Yeah,
sense
I
for you
think,
to?
and this is the other aspect of it that I am wrestling with, is that cons, as much as they are business, they're the like they're my social life. Like
Sure.
I don't my friends don't live near and around me. They live all over the world like you and Matt. So
Right,
I
right.
think for Mateo it's I mean it's his chance to get out of the small town of Parma and go see
For
his
sure.
buddies. So but at that point, but if you're running a business and time is something you don't have a lot of it, you got to be really selective about these shows because
Yeah.
if you just pick the ones best for your business, are they like Emerald City is great to see my friends.
Yes.
It's the main reason I will have trouble weeding that off of my schedule if I decide to.
Yeah.
It's probably the show I would say I go to see my friends more than any
Yeah.
other show.
Yeah, because the city is great. You know, it facilitates a lot of our hanging out. You know, we move at a particular speed. We're not necessarily. That's the reason why I can't really get. Whenever we used to all end up in New York, it was convenient for you because that used to be your old stomping grounds. You grew up in that area
Right,
from way back in the day.
right,
For Decal, he's on that coast, so it's a lot easier. And by way of
right,
plane ride,
right,
that's a 4 hours less, 5 hours less on Mateo's plane ride. So it made it easy. But for me, I now have to lose 4 hours, 3 hours, and I
right.
never really get comfortable in that city.
Well,
It's
New
not my.
York's not an easy town to do a show in.
Mm,
Seattle is so easy
sure,
because everything's a short walk.
sure,
Nothing's so crowded that you can't maneuver around it.
for sure. Yeah,
And as far as like getting into a restaurant and stuff, it's never impossible.
yeah,
Whereas New York, I mean, just getting to where the restaurants are
yeah.
is
From
an
where we're
adventure.
staying, right? Like
Right,
from
is an
where we're.
adventure.
Yeah,
It's not near
yeah.
the convention center. I mean,
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
so it's a
Well,
hard city to do a con in, whereas
yeah. It all.
Seattle's so kind of effortless.
Yeah. It all depends on where your mindset is, right? Some people are energized by being in New York. Me
I
less
am, and
so.
I love it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Seattle, it's much more relaxing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, so my point there is like you have to start doing the cost benefit analysis of, hey, we're going to all of these shows, and I'm just not talking about us. I'm talking about like the rest of the artists. Like we're going to all of these different shows, and how successful has it been for you collectively? Like what there's obviously things that we're not going to be able to see, all the periphery stuff. Like there could be conversation like, oh, it's a way for me to help promote myself where I'm at the show and
Right,
I'm out in people. Like I don't typically have a comic book in that I'm working on, a series or an ongoing whatever. It's a business trip for me because I go out there and do the handshaking and the hobnobbing that I'm
hmm,
like, I don't know if that's still. I really want them to. I really want to learn for myself by having them ask themselves, like, be honest. Are you? You say that, but is that still true? Right? Is
right,
that
right.
still a thing that's happening, or is that something that you're just holding on to? Because I never want to take, especially something like this. I never want to automatically take something at face value. We used to go to these shows because we understood their value. Hanging out was a nice icing on the cake.
Right,
But for me, it was good business, number one, because again, I wasn't
right.
working on a mainstream book. It was a way for me to keep my name out in circulation, and
Me too.
potentially there was things that I picked up there that by way of work, that I wouldn't have access to unless I was at those
Me
shows.
too. Right,
But in this day and age, when that's not as much of a priority for me, right? Not to say I don't like hanging out with you guys, but if it's going to cost me an arm and a leg, hey, let me
right,
take that money instead and do it exclusively for
right.
us
Which
hanging
is
out, right?
what we've talked about. I think in 2023 we have to make something happen because I agree with everything you're saying. And
Yeah,
I've been paying close attention to, because every show I'm doing, my main priority is promoting ink pulp instruction. And
right.
every show I do, I'm remaining aware of what happens with instruction after show. Do sales get up? Do I get a lot of new
Yeah,
people subscribing to
yeah,
my newsletter? Stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And the answer is no so far.
Mm, mm,
I'm getting some,
mm.
but I would imagine if I put that money that I put into the show into marketing on
Yeah,
the internet,
yeah,
I'd get a better return,
yeah, for
is
sure. I
my
mean,
guess
do you
right
ever
now.
do you ever think about like at the end of, and I remember this being really super helpful for Schoolism and Imaginism, which is Bobby Chu's. By the way, shout out to Bobby who's putting on this Lightbox thing that I am encouraging you, if not compelling you, to come out to.
Yeah, I want to
Um,
look everything. I feel like everything I'm doing is I'm trying to be Bobby.
yeah. So whenever he puts on these weekend long workshops, like he does them all over the world, and to Bobby's, I respect that guy so much. I remember asking him, What compels you to put on these shows at different parts of the world? He's that level of like successful now. He's that level of like notoriety. Schoolism had gotten to a level of like, oh, I know what that is. I know the instructors on there, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
really appreciate them. And he brings them out to these different locales all over the world, right?
Is that what
And
when you went to Portugal? Was that for Bobby?
no, that's THU. That's something
Okay,
else. That's Trojan Horses Unicorn. That's put on by
okay,
Andre, who is phenomenal. Phenomenal.
okay,
We'll get into stories about that later, but
okay.
of why he puts it on. But Bobby primarily, it came from a obvious, what I feel like to be a very altruistic place. He wants to be able to share and give access to a lot of these professionals who he saw as people who helped inspire him to get better at his craft and set him on the path of success, right? But the other thing, especially after he crossed a particular successful threshold, and I love him for saying this, he's like, I put on those shows in part of the parts of the world because I know that there's an audience for it there, but also because I've never seen that part of the world before. It
Mm,
kind of doubles for me as an opportunity to experience a completely different culture, a completely different part of the planet, and yada yada yada. I'm like, that's pretty awesome that you're at that in that successful place now, you know.
yeah, it's amazing.
But one of the things, and he puts it on, either nationally, so like, this story I'm about to tell, it's when I met up with him in Denver, and he puts it on internationally, and I met up with him once in Ireland, you know. So, the Denver show, when he put on the workshop, he asks people at the end of the workshop, like he hands out these pieces of paper. It's basically a feedback card.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can what did you find the most helpful? What did you find the most, you know what I mean? That might be worth time and effort for INKPULP when you put these things on. That way you get immediate feedback. You're literally like at the end of the show, at the end of the workshop that you put on.
Okay,
An
okay.
hour later, you know exactly how super helpful something was, and you're like, oh, that was the nice fluff, and I thought that was important. But if I put on my how is this going to help somebody who has aspirations to be an artist in an industry, this might be really really super helpful for them at this point in their journey. I have blinders on because I'm not even receiving at that broadcast signal,
All right.
it
I
might be
bet
worth it.
I could create through my website an online survey and put a QR code on a screen like at the end of my workshop, make it just as easy for them as possible.
You can, yeah. I mean, Bobby did it with like literal pen and piece of paper.
Right, right, right. I
Set up at the
yeah, I
door.
just my I guess my thinking that would be great. But those people came like that was an all schoolism thing they were part of.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
come to a Comic Con and then get into my panel, they're not at the con for my panel necessarily. I just don't want to ask too much that to the point where I
Just
might
a,
not get feedback.
listen, just a suggestion, dude. I mean, I'm not sure that everybody at the schoolism workshops give back the pieces of paper, but those that
Right.
do come back, really super impactful for them. Anyway,
Okay. Well, yeah,
where
yeah.
were we?
It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, so we were talking about the conventions, how it's turned into whatever the heck it is now. But I was also, and I went down this weird rabbit hole of thinking about this, right? Like I think you made a point earlier where you're like, hey, those things really were very Marvel comic centric, very DC comics centric, right? But then suddenly the movies came out, right? And then it started to become about almost like an advertisement for the next thing that's coming to a movie, and they just happen to have a comic book component attached to it. It wasn't the primary thing that were at
Right.
these
And
booths.
dude, it also a lot of it had nothing to do with the comic book.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
plenty of stuff at San Diego Comic Con that had nothing to do with comic
And
book.
that's not exclusive to Comic Con anymore, you know?
Right, right,
I
right.
think once the different avenues like Reed, like whomever, and by the way, this isn't on Reed, right? This is on the people who go into those spaces, the
Right.
publishers themselves, Marvel and DC, and then ultimately Warner Brothers and Disney. When they invest in putting on a convention booth, when they build one of those things, I think what they're looking at it is like, we can look at it as a comic book centric thing, but the expense that this thing is costing, right? We need to see this and we need to look at this from a completely different way. We were talking in the past about just like reframing the situation, you know, not necessarily making it about the success of like how many people sign up, but more like a well, just like an awareness tour, right? For both your
Right,
book,
right.
or for both your instruction school and my book. I think it's something similar.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah,
you like, if you just look at the convention, the amount of money that you put in there, the amount of people that you put up, the amount of like books that you sell, you'll end up in the red 3 or 6 times over, I would think, because people aren't necessarily there to immediately buy something from your booth
right,
when it comes to your comic, especially at, you know, $3. Well, at one point, like $3, $4 a pop. You know how many units you'd have to move in order to make that thing, you know, to consider that square or go into the black, you know.
right.
But if you reshift the framework of why you're there, instead of like, hey, we need to break even, to, hey, we need to make it about awareness about our
Right.
most recent thing,
It's a marketing expense. Yeah.
suddenly you go like, it's not so bad because we've spent so much more on marketing and not gotten a much, you know, we hadn't gotten as much of a return, or we're going to get a similar return as far as our expectancy. We spend $100, if we get $20 of it back, totally cool by us, you know.
Hmm.
We work at an $80 loss, at an 80% loss or whatever. And
Right.
I think that's when things started to change, by way of just how the personnel and the culture within those publishing houses started to change as well. This doesn't take into account um, the individuals themselves and who they are, but just the culture. You know, obviously who they are and how they conduct themselves feeds into that, but the culture of like, you're not really as important as the movies.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you
Yeah.
are just the added expense that we put on our docket, that we put on our expense, you know, in our expense sheet,
Right.
to the movies. We're actually focusing more on the movies itself. We say things like the history and the legacy of Marvel Comics is important to us, which sounds awesome,
Right.
which sounds like that's so cool that it's important to you. But in and of itself, the business of publishing is not important to you.
Right.
As a
Right.
matter of fact, it's as an expense, it's dismissible, right? Because, you know, Marvel as a brand, as an effort, DC as a brand and as an effort, will not rise and fall based on their publishing endeavors, right? It hinges seemingly more these days based on how they're represented on screen,
Oh, for
how
sure.
they're represented on Disney Plus. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, Marvel, I mean, the whole way they built their company is there's Marvel West and Marvel Publishing, and they're two different businesses.
Mm,
Marvel
mm,
Publishing is hurting. Marvel West is thriving.
yeah. Like, I look at it like this: if, and this, by the way, is the cartoonish, overly simplified. Um, I'd want to hear from you about this. Like, is overly simplified concept. If Marvel Comics shuts down tomorrow, Marvel as a business, and especially their feature film business, they won't feel a single thing.
Not a thing at all. No, no,
They
that's what
they
I
would be
mean.
like, oh, we have enough of it in our archive. We have enough in those omnibuses. We have
They
enough
can make
stuff.
movies for hundreds of years based on these properties.
Exactly, exactly. However, if Marvel Films, if Marvel Cinematic Universe shuts down tomorrow,
Oh, it's all going down.
yeah, I think Marvel as a publishing endeavor, DC as a publishing endeavor, like, will really start feeling the pain of what contraction ultimately means. And we're talking about just as a business and just as a profitable entity. People always conflate the concept of like DC to be like, well, they'll have their animation arm and blah blah. I'm like, no, no, no. Just as a publishing, just as a business of publishing comic
Right.
books,
Right.
where would they be if they didn't have all of these other things helping to stand them up foundationally?
Right.
They'd be in so much trouble, which then again reflects on your culture, right? So here's what
Hmm.
I mean. If you if you value the culture across the board, that means there is an evenness relative to the impact that it has on your business, right? you would vet the hell out of personnel.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? You would make sure that when it comes to the context of publishing, when it comes to the context of feature film, when it comes to the context of like television animation, whatever it is, you are vetting for those people in the at the leadership position in the highest quality possible. You're not trolling. You're not scouring the bottom end of LinkedIn. You're not going to the depths of LinkedIn to find somebody to populate that spot. And
Right.
most specifically, you would take those people, that person, that human salary, very seriously,
Yeah.
because you
And
bring in a specific kind of professional individual at a specific salary, and you go like, we take this thing seriously.
and you'd have one hell of a training program for the new hires as well.
Correct. You would have an onboarding program. What do you call it? Yeah, you would have an onboarding program that rivals what. I mean, I was at Disney when working on Tron, right? And their orientation program was a week and a half long.
Wow.
They're going to walk you through their history. They're going to walk you through what it means for their brand. They're going to walk you through everything what it means to work for that company. I don't think any employee from Marvel ever did that. And if they did it through like a video, and they just click next, next, and call it a day.
Yeah, I
It
think
is to
so too.
say that there is nothing in Marvel's publishing arm, in DC's publishing arm, that sets them up culturally for success. Number one, you underpay them.
Yeah.
Number two, you don't vet the hell out of them. So even the ones that you get are being, and I know this for a fact, they're being recommended by friends of friends,
Yeah, I know.
right?
Yeah, I know that
who
too.
have, who have like no experience in the space, which I don't mind if you have a little bit of experience in this space, but you also have to have the mentorship and the guidance built in. It has to be built into your culture to walk them through what it means to be in that space, to set them up for long-term success. And again, if you have if you zoom out again to the 10,000 foot view of, we are prioritizing movies, and it's clear how we're doing that because we use your booth as a loss leader, so to speak. We use our presence at these different conventions to just say like, we don't really care about the publishing. We're looking at it more as free advertising. We're not really free, but the advertising for the next thing that we're coming up with.
Right.
You draw in the appropriate people for those spaces,
Yeah.
right? Number one, not just internally, but also externally, the fans are just going to walk through that place looking for the next cool Thor Ragnarok outfits that's behind glass so they can see it up close and personal.
Right.
And maybe once in a while they'll get a free poster. Everything is always free because that's how advertising works. But
Right.
rare are you making any of these efforts for your publishing. And it's pretty clear to me why people are like, I wonder why these comic books are costing an arm and a leg. I wonder why Marvel is doing 20. I lean and and I'm very biased against all of and anything that Marvel is currently doing for their advertising pushes, but they're handcuffed, right?
Yeah.
And why I wonder why Marvel is doing like 20, 30 plus variant number one covers, and you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I could step back and say like, not my monkeys, not my circus. But if I really, if I really sit down and think about why they're doing that, it's a lot more systemic than just a bunch of dumb people. Which, that's inexcusable. Obviously, I'm not going to let them off scot free. But at the end of the day, it comes from a very poor cultural way people are conducting themselves, or a cultural the way people are conducting themselves culturally are being informed by how their parent companies are treating them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Total sense.
That's a lot of talking from me, man.
You need a coffee break.
I'm gonna need to take a walk around the block just so I can regain my composure. But comics is a funny business to me, dude. Comics. I mean, as much as I love the actual medium itself, is it a medium? I don't even know.
Comics is a medium.
Okay.
I always looked at it like comics is a medium first and an industry second. I
Okay.
mean, there's an
Yeah.
industry around it, but it's an art form.
Right. Right.
Um, but I've always been more concerned with the art form than the industry. to
Yeah.
my detriment probably,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
uh, um, it's something I've put a lot of thought to more and more recently because
Yeah.
I've given up on the industry.
Oh, sure.
I'm hardly a part of the industry
Yeah.
because I'm now building my own cottage industry, as you
Sure.
are.
Sure.
Um, but I also, like we've talked about this before, I think for too many people, the industry is the priority and the craft, the medium is
Mm.
what suffers. And when I think about, I've been thinking about this a lot lately in regards to ink pulp instruction. I remember when I first started it, like one of the things I really wanted to do with it was to have this timeless archive of these great creators and their tricks and their not tricks, but all their individual techniques that are unique to
Sure.
them. And
Sure.
I think about like like two generations before you and I, like, wow, I would love to have a video of Wollywood inking and explaining how and what
Mm.
he's doing,
Mm.
and Jack Davis and people like that. So I think we're at a time right now, or I feel like we're at a time where the craft, not all of it, but a lot of it is really poor. And
Mm.
what I'm hoping to do with ink pulp instruction is reinvigorate the younger generation coming up to get excited about the craft and hopefully create a shift for better comics in the future for everyone.
Yeah. 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 Again, to me, if I can point at anything, that goes back to my cultural call, which is not you, but when an industry deprioritizes its tenants, when it deprioritizes the thing that they got them, the thing that got them there, and just start, it's very difficult to be, because I can see the business side of it. It's very difficult for me to be overly critical because I know I can understand the challenges that are sitting in front of them. Right, they've been
And there's plenty.
deprioritized as a business effort. Right, they've
There's
been
plenty.
deprioritized as yeah, they've been deprioritized as a business effort. They have been told they can only do so much with what's given to them, and now they're getting dum-dums inside editorial spaces
Yes, they are.
who have neither the history in narrative nor in
True.
art,
True.
and they're being told, "Hey, make this work," and they don't have enough resources by way of mentorship or toolkits that helps them level up in that space. They're literally, as best as the definition will allow, just making sure they are glorified schedule keepers,
Yep. That's a very good way of putting it.
right? And I don't
Yeah.
understand. Why not just call them that? Why not just call them like, schedule keepers as opposed to editors? Because some of them, not all of them, but some of them, where you go like, you want to know why the quality of this book is poor, why suddenly this art is the standard and by which you are representing superhero comics, and that's what they are, right? Your
Hmm.
brand says you are a superhero comic, and how does this art help exemplify that? How does this be the sort of aspirational version of superheroes, of what it means to be a hero, what it means to be somebody who has faults, who has like flaws but rises above them, and therefore you can relate and cheer for them. How does this art represent that? And I'm not saying go all the way to the extreme of like a Rob Liefeld or the craziness that is a Todd McFarlane. Everybody always thinks, oh, Canete's going to end up talking about like the fucking 90s, and I'm like, no, I'm not. Rare am I ever going to go into that space, but there are instances where you look at things like, even stylistically, somebody like Norm Brayfogle, somebody like
Hmm.
John Bogdanov, somebody like John Burns, somebody like Dave Cockrum, and these are old school guys, and people are like, oh, that's a dated style. That's not what I'm pointing at. The
Right.
style is not what I'm pointing at. And again, it gets confused. It gets confused. Like, oh, you just want to bring back like vintage looking stuff. And I'm like, no, I want to bring back the aspirational way those things are being drawn. You
Right.
mean
Right.
hypersexual? No, aspirational. It just
Right.
happened to be that the culture allowed for it to be hypersexualized back then. but it sure as heck doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be a one-to-one. It could. I won't leave that off the table, but it could do that. But the guys that they're drawing now, the way people are being drawn now, like normal dudes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that aspirational, or is that just because there's some guy who's, on the editorial side, who's not smart enough to understand and pay homage to their brand? He doesn't quite. They don't quite understand that. Oh yeah, this is a superhero brand, and for me to keep doing like normies in cosplay outfits in these books, that doesn't make any sense to continue these brands. Again, as sort of like ramped up as I will get about these kinds of things, I'll just fall back to like, not my monkeys, not my circus. I don't care about that shit anymore.
Along those lines, I wish I could remember who I was having this conversation with. It was an artist I was talking to about a book they're working on. It was Marvel or DC, I don't remember. I want to say it might have been like a Superman book. And I think it was even a Bendis script.
Sure.
And it's just like, they're like, oh, this is the Talking Head Superman book, or this is the, and I don't know
Did
if
they
it was
describe it
Superman
like
for sure.
that?
Yeah. No, they described it as a not an action book in any way, shape, or form.
How tragic.
And my response, like we were talking about, I was like, what reader is gonna buy that? Like, it seems completely tone deaf to what a superhero comic is.
Sure.
It's like the slice of life of the Superman titles. It's like,
and like I said, somebody got introduced into that editorial office that said, hey, this is okay to do. Right? And I don't have anything against Bendis. I don't have to read his books, right?
No, I'm not even.
I don't care to. And I think there's room for a Bendis when he was doing whatever he was doing. But somehow, some dum-dum on the editorial end read Bendis' stuff on a Superman-ish like title, where whatever he was in previously, and said, whoa, that works. And a whole slew of people who were copying the heck out of that narratively started to implement it across the board. And you go like, oh, you don't get why that's special. You want to make everything Dark Knight Returns, not realizing in order for Dark Knight Returns to work, you have to have it in context to what Batman was. Right? Or Batman is. And it's not all deconstruction all the time. It's like really cool detective / action stories.
Yes.
You need a smart, forward-thinking, clearly aware of the brand individual, human being that goes like, the reason why Bendis works, why Bendis' writing works, is because in context and in contrast to everything that we're publishing out there, it has its own quote-unquote voice. But to make everything like Bendis doesn't make any sense. And that's number one, or actually that's number two. Most importantly, that's not who we are as a brand. So Bendis is a nice offshoot, but if we were to make, can you imagine? I'm trying to, okay, so Marvel, the Cinematic Universe, and by the way, they're falling into this trap right now. The Marvel Cinematic Universe did its Iron Man all the way to Thor Ragnarok, right? Some were successful, some were less successful. The moment Thor Ragnarok hit, they were like, oh shit. Now, actually, no, even before, Thor Ragnarok / Guardians of the Galaxy. But the moment Thor Ragnarok hit, by the way, I'm not blaming the director or the writing style. It just happened to fall on the sort of ears that goes, we need more of that always and on everything.
Yeah.
Right? And then you go like, oh, fuck, then we're going to get more Thor Ragnaroks. Right? What works when you have a deliberate mastermind, and in this case, masterminds behind the scenes who know how to make this work, is when you have the Russo brothers who understand, yes, you need a tiny bit of humor. You need a bit of Thor Ragnarok in your scripts because this is so heavy.
You had the brilliant mind of Taika Waititi behind that.
That's different, right? Like, yes, of course, you have that mastermind behind it,
Right.
And once you start incorporating that into everything, it dilutes it. Unsurprisingly, it dilutes it, right? Because you don't have the crafted and I think a smart enough hand who knows how to use that tool very well,
Right.
So going back to comics, you see the Bendis and you're like, oh, that's entertaining. Not my kind of entertaining, but I get it. I understand where there's room for it. When you let everybody do it and they're not as good as he is, now you get the comics that you're getting, that's being published now. And there is nobody at the helm going like, don't do that for everything, you know?
Right.
Don't put that on like,
Right. Right.
you know, on an X book and on everything. We understand what X-Men is. We understand what this thing is for, what it's about, what its history is. You first of all, we don't do that. Second of all, you're not good enough to do that. Right? The reason
True.
we would that I remember Mark Chiarello in one, and this is more art centric than narrative focused. But I remember him in one of the talent searches. I keep referring to this story back and how I broke in. But I remember Mark standing at the front end of the stage. This was when when they were still able to do talent searches at San Diego Comic-Con. Room for like 400 hopeful people with artist portfolios all under their arms,
I
right?
was there.
And I remember Mark Chiarello saying, okay, so before we get started, there's like a lot of people, and I don't know if these are his words, but whenever I reflect this back to Mark, he has a good, he has a good smile and he cracks up about it. I remember him saying, okay, there's a lot of people here, so before we get started, if your portfolio looks like Jim Lee, we can't use you.
I remember the same speech.
We won't, it's very difficult for us to hire you because I know Jim Lee. And if we want something from Jim Lee, we're going to go ask Jim Lee to draw this thing.
Yep.
Right? And I remember how profound that concept was because in context, that's that's the style that people were hiring for.
Yeah.
Jim was so successful. So as a company, if we want our stuff to be successful, if you want to be viable as a comic book artist, you're going to follow that look. Fuck, man. Jim started an entire publishing endeavor on guys who kind of drew like him, right?
Yep.
But Mark said because he's Mark Chiarello and he's that guy, he was like, listen, we know why Jim Lee works and it's because he's Jim Lee. As a company, DC Comics won't do that, at least not while I'm at the helm.
Yeah.
We want to find new voices, new sort of like things that will engage people. We want to be part of a culture that helps introduce exciting art.
Yep.
And imagine that, well, Mark's not there anymore, but imagine that being applied narratively as well. Hey, if you write like Bendis, if you write in this sort of like wall of text way, we already have that. We don't need that. We would prefer to find somebody new. And it's not to say, hey, don't write like Bendis, but if that's all you have in your back pocket, we can't hire you because we know what we're about. We know the tenets that are in place that allows us to exist as the place that people want to come to in order to be able to draw our comics. You know, we have a very, very high value system. What good looks like for us is up here, and I'm in Mark's case, he was part of establishing what good looks like, if not the guy that establishes what good looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
It's funny. You just reminded me through that story. I remember you had to go listen to Mark's talk, and if in order to get your portfolio reviewed, you had to go to the talk, get the ticket that
Yes.
you would use in line the next
Yes.
day,
Yes.
and they would give you your time slots there. They'd be like, "Bring your ticket between 2 and 3 tomorrow."
That's right.
And I
That's
remember
right.
Mark's reputation for being like really hard, really
Yes.
hardcore, really
Yeah.
nasty. And then I sat down with Mark and he liked what I was doing and he was nothing but kind to me. And for
Yes.
my entire career, I worked with him a bunch of times, but even when I wasn't getting work, he would always take the time to chat with me, and he was the opposite of what this reputation was.
Yeah.
And
I
he
think
just
it's just
reminded me of that reputation because I forgot about it.
yeah, I think it's a lot to do with each person receiving pieces of feedback from Mark. And if you're like soft in the head, if you're soft in the heart, you're going to think that Mark is like, super crass and unforgiving and really harsh. And similar to you, he'd never gotten. I've stood behind Mark when he's giving portfolio reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was a version that had softened because he was getting feedback that he was too harsh, but I was standing behind Mark in those days when he had that reputation, not years later,
Right.
when he kind of got softer and said, "Hey, maybe I shouldn't be as harsh," because it's really like part of it. I think just within the context of that time period and that sort of like culture and society, you're gonna get bombed on, right? And it made you tougher. And anybody who said like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's not conducive to like making better artists," and blah blah blah, and go fuck yourselves. Like, you're
Yeah, I
not.
agree.
You're.
But
I don't
it was
understand
also
why you.
never personal. He was very
Absolutely.
critical, and
And
because
here's
he
the
knew what he was doing and he knew what he was
absolutely. And
saying.
here's the point that I wanted to make was that more often than not, when Mark disagreed with whatever call that you made, except this one time when you said it to me, right? Like the calls that you made, like he saw something different or he didn't quite understand. Mark asked more questions than
Yeah,
anything.
yeah,
Why did you do this? And if that's confrontational to you, if that's like, oh,
right,
that's overly harsh and critical and blah blah blah, Mark was just like, why did you color the sky yellow? What
right.
what was the motivation between you? Like these aren't his words, but he was like, I'm wondering why you colored the sky yellow, and then he would tell you from from the way we do things over here, it's more like this, and this, right? The one time that he called something out on the pages that I showed him, he pointed at a nose that was way too close to the panel border. As a matter of fact, I think it touched the panel border. And Mark's like, "You messed that up. Like, don't do that. That's an awful tangent." And I think maybe it was just more like a combination of trying to help me out and his pet peeve of like tangents.
Right, right.
He was like, "Don't do that." That was like as curt and as sort of like cut off as he was, but for the most part, I've more than I would say easily a dozen plus times I've stood behind Mark when he gives portfolio reviews to people who are brave enough to go up and ask him in the middle of the con floor. He's very direct with them. Hey, I can't do too much of an in-depth thing, but whatever it is that you have, I'll take a look. Right? I don't understand where he gets that like, oh, he's
Yeah,
he bombs on you and he's super crass. But also
yeah,
part of me is like, stop being so soft.
yeah.
Like
The dude, yeah. I think if there's a way to callous this industry, it could use it right now.
yeah, for sure. I
Um,
mean, I don't know of too many other people who I don't know of in a ton of these events, and this goes back to the theme of our overall topic of how these shows have transformed into what they've come today. Again, I don't begrudge them. Business is business. It's your business. You
sure,
do whatever
sure.
whatever you want. But I think one of the key opportunities that we're people are missing out on now are just these great one-on-one personal relationships that you potentially could build with editors and art directors and so on of these companies because you can, I've seen it where some guy shows up one year, he's not good enough. 2 years later, they just keep coming back
Yep,
and getting better. And
that was
because of the
me.
feedback that their art directors, the editors were giving them, you
That
should
was
try
me.
this, or here's an opportunity for growth for you here. You miss out on that sort of opportunity, right? Not just
Agreed.
that, but obviously like establishing genuine connections of whether or not this artist has growth. They have what it takes to keep coming back and getting, proverbially punched in the face, and you miss out on that because these shows have
Yeah,
not are not facilitating that anymore. And I don't know if there's a version of that out there anymore. It's almost like
yeah,
people are finding other ways to get at the to get into the editorial spaces to be able to talk to them. But to be fair and completely fair but completely biased, it's not as if when they do make contact with these editors, they're qualified to make the kinds of calls that a Mark Chiarello could anyway. You know?
yeah. I mean, yeah. That's that's a big point. And I was gonna say when this whole conversation, I'm thinking about the industry and the medium and when it all kind of turned. But when the industry got rid of Mark Chiarello, the medium took a hit.
Yeah.
You don't have that mind looking over work and helping massage it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's bad.
Yeah. You weed it out of the again. We're talking about like these cultural nuances that at the very least, um, from the outside looking in, it's like if I'm in a space, the point of like if I'm on the outside and looking at like, okay, what does this industry look like? Holy crap, there's a really, really good editor with multiple notches on their belt that help stand up an industry. Whoa, they're responsible for X, Y, and Z successful title that's being sort of celebrated years after the fact. Their hit to miss ratio is so high in as far as like hits are concerned. They are responsible. They're at the front end of those projects. And what are you telling me there's an art director in that space that helps me understand they hold not just narrative, but art, right? That's comic book centric, that's sequential art telling centric. They have somebody in those spaces that help also establish that bar of what good looks like. That perception goes a long way.
For sure.
Right? That, like, whoa, they take themselves seriously as a business. Right?
Yeah.
Not just on the money end, not just on the financial end, but obviously on the craft end, because they know that goes hand in hand to their overall definition of success, right?
For sure.
But when you take the art director out and you hire dum-dums, how can you possibly expect the outside world looking in to take you seriously? All right, I think that's a good way to end that episode. All right, man. We are gonna sign off on this one. I'm gonna do the thing where I do your outro.
Okay.
How about that?
I do this.
I don't think you should.
Just hit the outro.
All right. I gotta find it first. You've thrown me off.
That's my joy. That's my
I
goal.
hate it so much. All right, here we go. I dislike it so much.